Hello everyone, and welcome to Talking Pictures, where every episode I and a guest will be talking about, you guessed it, motion pictures. More specifically, we'll be talking about the types of films the guest loves, how they came to love them, and why they love them. This week we'll be discussing Star Wars, I wonder why, and I can think of no one better to talk about this with than probably the biggest Star Wars nut I personally know. Before we get started, though, I do want to issue a few warnings. One, I'm recording this after I did the rest of the show for a couple reasons. One, for some reason the audio didn't record quite right, so if you listen to it on your headphones, you'll notice that my audio is coming out of one earbud and the guest's audio is coming out of another earbud. Another problem is that I thought I was muting my mic while the guest was talking. It turns out while it was muted on Skype, the audio recording system that I'm using still picked it up. So throughout the show, you are going to notice some background noise on my end. I'm sorry about that. I tried to get rid of some of the most annoying bits, but you will be hearing that. I'm going to try to fix both of these problems for the next episode, but for now, please just try to bear with me. But without further ado, I do want you to welcome my dear friend Andrew. Andrew, thank you for being with me today.
Hey, thanks, Tim. Glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
To start off at the beginning, as it were, when did you first see Star Wars for the first time?
I was about 4 years old, I think. I saw it at my aunt's house. She was one of those rare people that I knew that had what was then new technology called a VCR. And she had recorded Star Wars from, I think, ABC or CBS, I think ABC. And so that was how I first saw it, was on a tiny little TV, recorded off of TV, fast forwarding through commercials and edited for television. So it would have been 83 when I first saw the original Star Wars, or as it was then called, A New Hope. The hype was big. Of course, me being 4, I had no idea what hype was at that point, but my parents had told me that I would really like this movie. They had actually gone and seen it, and my mom later told me that after they saw it, they thought that it was just a silly kids movie. Little did they know that it would pretty much consume my child and adult life.
As anybody who knows you knows, you're really obsessed with Star Wars, and I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean that with
No,
totally
yeah.
positive vibes. What about the movies have kept you interested in them and fascinated by them?
That's a good question. Because I was so young, it's hard to say. When I was little, it was probably because I hadn't seen a whole lot of non-animated movies at that point, and so it was something that I'd never seen before and was completely blown away by it. But then I think another part of it was probably the toys, right? Everybody that knows Star Wars knows that it was the start of the merchandising madness when it comes to summer blockbuster movies, right? That was the first one that just had toys upon toys upon toys, and those were really the toys of my childhood, were those Star Wars toys. So I think that kept it in my brain, and it was one of the few movies that we would watch when we would go visit my aunt or go over to my grandma's house. It was one of the few movies that they actually had, so it was that repeat viewing had it in my mind. But then as I grew older, I began to appreciate more the story, the mythology of it, and really start to analyze some of the finer details. And that was also, the 80s was an interesting time because that was kind of the beginning of peeking behind the curtain for a lot of people. You know, there were a lot of making of documentaries and stuff that would air on TV, and they would release those on video. And so I would watch those religiously as well, and really started to get my juices flowing for the appreciation of film in general. And that's really where my love of film started, was with Star Wars.
The stories of how much and how many movies George Lucas had in mind when he originally started writing Star Wars has been a bit, I mean, there's a lot of conflicting stories about that. There's one story that says that he wanted to put Episode 4 in front of the original Star Wars, they wouldn't let him, and then there's another story where I read where he originally was going to call Empire Strikes Back Episode 2, and then he changed his mind, and went from 3 movies to 6 movies to 9 movies to 80 movies to all this type of stuff.
George Lucas is infamous for changing his mind and telling different stories, right? And I think he pretty much answered everybody's question at the end of the TV show Lost, when he wrote a letter to Carlton Cuse, one of the showrunners, and congratulated him on a great show, and saying that he long learned that it's always best to act like you knew what the purpose was all along, and to act like you knew what you were doing from day one. And that pretty much tells me that George Lucas had no idea what he was doing. He didn't have plans for episodes 1, 2, 3, or 7, 8, 9. You can really kind of see that if you go back and read the first draft of Star Wars, where it's pretty much the same story with a broader scope, but it's basically, rescuing the princess. There's no Death Star at that point, but rescuing the princess and saving the galaxy.
I'll tell you my story about seeing Phantom Menace real quick. I saw it at a local theater when I was, to give away my age, I would have been 8. So, pretty young.
All right. I'm the old one. Yeah,
Okay.
it's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I was 8, and I was seeing it with my brother, my sister, and I think a friend or two of theirs. My brother had gotten tickets for it he had done a paper out, and they gave him tickets to the movie. So we went to go see the movie. There was a line out the theater. We finally got into the actual auditorium theater, whatever you want to call it. Was absolutely mad. The most I've never seen before or since seeing something be that hectic.
It was that opening night.
Yeah, that was, well, it was
Yeah,
opening day, yeah. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
and people were trying to get seats. Somebody had to go to the bathroom. I was trying to tell this lady who, I don't know if she understood English, that she couldn't sit next to me. And opening text crawl started. And everybody cheered. There was a guy going to or away from his seats with like a thing of popcorn. He was like holding it up in triumphant like joy. And it was just absolutely... It was just absolutely crazy. None of the other prequels, nor Force Awakens, did I ever see that much of a response. Then the movie started, and then there was the backlash against it. But I'm wondering, going into it, what was your kind of hopes or ideas about how it was going to be?
I don't think I could have been more excited. I mean, I've been dreaming of seeing episodes 1, 2, and 3 as long as I can remember. So, yeah, when that came out, I remember going to see it with my sister, who was back from college, and we went to the midnight opening show, and yeah, it was just utter madness. Lines out the door, you'd go up there and get your ticket, and then you'd basically be getting in another line to get into the actual theater. I mean, it was crazy. The anticipation for it, I think, is part of why there was that backlash. I think that a lot of fans they'd kind of written the prequels in their minds, and so no matter what they did, they weren't going to match what everybody had wanted. A lot of people, they wanted to see late teens, early 20s Anakin Skywalker just kicking butt. I always say that, if you look at the first, 20 minutes of Revenge of the Sith, I think that's what people wanted the prequels to be. Just spread out, right? They just wanted to see the Clone Wars start to finish. And when all of a sudden you've got this, 10-year-old boy on screen saying things like wizard and yippee, a lot of people who expected Star Wars to grow up with them were disappointed to find out that, lo and behold, Star Wars is a children's franchise. I don't think they were quite ready for that. I absolutely loved it. I wanted to immediately turn around and go back into a theater and watch it again. Of course, being a midnight showing, we got out at 2:30, and that just wasn't going to happen. But I did go back the next day. I think I probably saw it in the theater 6 or 7 times when it came out. And I was actually, this was back in the day before the wild west of the internet and social media. And so I was shocked, absolutely shocked, when it was my dad. My dad first told me, he's like, so what'd you think of all the backlash that Jar Jar Binks is getting, and how, George Lucas is being labeled as a racist? And I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. I thought Jar Jar was, sure, annoying, but racist? What? Where is this coming from? I think that everything just kind of got blown out of proportion. And as soon as one person said Jar Jar is stupid and, ruined my childhood, everybody just the media latched onto that. It was all over the papers that George Lucas, created this character and it was racist. But it was just like, it's a movie. It's a movie for kids. Just I wanted to tell people to get over themselves, frankly, and, just kind of roll with the flow a little bit. What was your first reaction?
I remember liking it a lot. I mean, the lightsaber fights I thought were just amazing. Because if you don't
best lightsaber fights of any Star Wars movie.
Because you don't see anything like that in any of the original films. There's nothing. I mean, the best lightsaber fight in those movies, in my opinion, is probably at the end of Empire. But even that doesn't approach The
Right.
ones in the prequels, especially as an 8-year-old kid, I found those really cool. Some of the big problems. The pod racing, Jake Lloyd, and Jar Jar Binks were some of the things that, even as I was 8, I found to be a problem.
Did you really like see? And I've had this conversation with other folks who are a little bit younger than you. You know, saying like when you first saw it, were you thinking I cannot stand Jar Jar Binks? He's a terrible character, or is that something that you latched onto a little bit later that you had heard from somebody? I don't see how like an 8-year-old can hate Jar Jar. He's Jar Jar. He's funny. He's silly. He makes fart jokes. What's not to like?
I didn't have specific ideas about him because I was 8. I didn't really think about those things in any kind of critical way. Every time he was on screen, I did find it a bit uncomfortable and embarrassing. I didn't know really why I felt that until I was an adult, and I found him not very funny and stupid, quite frankly. I just was always uncomfortable when he was on screen. The pod racing, I like the concept of it, but at the time I got impatient with it and wish it ended sooner than it did.
I'll agree with you on the pod racing. When I saw that, I felt that it was a little long, and I know why it's there. It's to establish him as, you know, a great pilot, right? Because that's what Obi-Wan tells Luke.
And it should be exciting because it's fast-paced racing on space.
It looks amazing, right? The special effects are incredible, but yeah, it goes on too long, and you've got so the prequels. It's all about the Jedi, right? The Jedi are in their prime in that point, and during the pod race, the two main characters that you've learned about so far in the movie, one of them is just standing in the stands looking at an iPad watching the race. The other one is stuck back at the ship just babysitting the queen, but the queen isn't actually there. Like it after all of the action at the very beginning, it just got to be a little long before there was any more actual action. And I wanted to get back to that, and the pod race definitely slows it down. And it's a shame then that when it was released on DVD, they decided to expand that scene and make it even longer.
Wait, they did?
Yeah.
I didn't know about this.
Yeah, in the theaters, they only showed 2 of the laps around the circle, whereas when the DVD, they show all 3.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Dear.
So, yeah. And Jake Lloyd, I feel sorry for the guy. He really took a lot of flack in that movie, and he's really kind of had a lot of personal problems that I think have spawned out of that, which is a shame. I mean, people were tearing him apart as an actor online. Critics were just tearing him apart. And yes, he's not great in that movie, but come on, he's a 10-year-old kid.
And if you look at those movies, all 3 prequels, I mean, for the most part, they have a really solid cast of people. They have Natalie Portman, they have Samuel L. Jackson, they have Frank Oz returning as Yoda, they have Ewan McGregor.
Liam Neeson,
yes, Liam Neeson. They have a lot of great people in there, and all of them, maybe not as much as Jake Lloyd or Hayden Christensen, but all of them suffer to a degree, and they're all good, if not great, actors.
I'm going to disagree. I'm going to disagree with you on that. Especially in The Phantom Menace. I mean, Natalie Portman didn't have a lot to do in that movie, so I think she did fine with what she was given. But I think that Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, and Ian McDiarmid are great in that movie. I'm going to use the word great.
Well, I'm not saying they're not. I'm not saying they don't. I'm saying they all have moments where they're not doing very well. And not saying they're not great and during portions of it, or even the majority of it. Like Ewan McGregor at the end of Revenge of the Sith is, I think, great. I think he's wonderful. I'm just saying the problems that didn't help Jake Lloyd are not helping any of them. It's just that I think Jake Lloyd, being younger, not having as much experience, and not to be mean about it, I don't think he is the best actor in the world. I think he could have done a lot better, and there are moments where he is doing better, but he's hampered by the awkward dialogue and all that. Before we move on from the prequels, I would like to, in defense of the prequels, one, I think Revenge of the Sith, while having a lot of problems that plague all 3 of the prequels, is actually a good movie, and is, in my opinion, the best out of those 3. I mean, it's really depressing, so I don't watch it very much because it's really depressing, but I think it is actually a good movie. It's Hayden Christensen, I think, at its best. I think it's Lucas's prequel writing at its best, and yes, there were problems with it, but
Well, I mean, and let's face it, Hayden Christensen was cast to be Darth Vader. He wasn't cast to be a love-struck Anakin Skywalker. I think that he does angsty really well. He doesn't do the lovey-dovey stuff very well. And you say that episode 3 is depressing. I totally agree with you. And when he, finally went to the dark side and went to his knees and said he would do anything that the Emperor asks, it was an emotional moment. And I think it was emotional because we had seen him as that sweet 10-year-old boy on Tatooine who just wanted to grow up and be a Jedi. If you didn't have that, would you have felt as emotionally attached to that character?
Without going back in time and watching just Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, I don't know for sure. I will say, I thought this in the theater, that while Anakin is still too whiny and too basically emo and annoying and stuff in Revenge of the Sith, he's a little bit less rash. He thinks a bit more. He doesn't jump into action as quickly, and he is a bit more likable, I think, in Revenge of the Sith. Like, there's the one scene at the beginning of the movie where him and Obi-Wan are trapped behind a force field or something, and they're trying to think of how to get out of it. And Anakin actually thinks about solutions he can do instead of just being like, I'm going to, I don't know, do something really stupid.
Coming right after he jumped out of a moving elevator. I don't know how much thinking he does before he acts.
I'm saying he's a bit better. I'm not saying he's perfect.
Okay.
Basically, my point is that Lucas made him likable enough that I actually did care when he did do the fall. Now, it wasn't nearly enough in terms of, because you don't see enough of the good man to feel as emotional as you should when you see that being lost. When Obi-Wan talks about him in New Hope, you see, I think, at least I pictured in my mind, a much more likable person, a much more, than that. Because you don't see enough of that in the prequels, and that's one of the big problems with it.
Well, you see a lot of that in episode 1. So you can't discount it, because that's where you get to learn that he is this sweet, innocent little boy and how corrupted he became thanks to Emperor Palpatine. Yeah, look at it this way. The kid was ripped from his mom when he was 10 years old. He's taken to a Jedi temple. He doesn't have interaction with anybody other than Jedi, who at that point are very, strict in their ways and very set in their religion. And so can you really blame the guy for internalizing everything and not being able to emote and be a normal human being? I mean, sure, Obi-Wan could do that, but it's Ewan McGregor. So, I mean, come on, it's natural. Plus, he was the chosen one, whatever that means.
After the prequels had some disappointments in them, and I'm sure it didn't live up to all your expectations, I would think.
Okay, yeah.
I mean,
not all of them, for the most part, but not all of them, yeah.
What were your thoughts about a sequel trilogy, 7, 8, and 9, finally being made?
I had my reservations. I always figured that they would happen someday. I didn't think that they would happen while George Lucas was still alive. I thought it would be something where he would leave the company to his children, and his children would say, okay, we need money. Let's make some more Star Wars movies. I did not expect him to sell the company to Disney, and that made me kind of sad. Announced that they were selling the company and they were making more Star Wars movies. I was nervous, I think is the word. Like, what are they going to do with it? At that point, George Lucas was still said to be like a story consultant. That ended up kind of not really happening. But when all that was happening, up to that point, all the Star Wars that I knew and loved at least had some control from George Lucas. Everything had come from his mind, and he knew the mythology and everything that made those movies what they were. Love them or hate them, but it was an unknown frontier. I wasn't so much worried the fact that it was Disney. When I say that I was sad because Lucasfilm was an independent company. Star Wars is the only movie that was not independently made. All the other Star Wars movies were basically independent films, paid for by George Lucas himself. I was saddened by the fact that Lucasfilm was no longer an independent filmmaking company, and that it was going to become a commercial company. And that just kind of made me sad. It's not a big corporation, I guess, is what I'm getting at, is that it's still a small company when you look at film companies. You compare it to a Disney Motion Pictures or a Paramount Pictures or Universal Studios. Like you compare it to those, and it's definitely an independent company. Sure, they commercialize it because they want to be able to make money, but it's still an independent film.
So you went into it a bit worried, Force Awakens. What were your thoughts when you finally saw it?
I had mixed thoughts when I first saw it. I remember walking out of the theater thinking I was more excited and amped coming out of The Phantom Menace than I was coming out of The Force Awakens. I didn't really know why. I still don't really know why. Since seen it, I don't know, maybe a dozen times since I first saw it, but I've come to enjoy it more. And I think going into it, I was thinking about it too much. Starkiller Base, how does it work? It seemed redundant. You drain a sun to then blow up the solar system. Well, that seemed redundant because if you drain the sun, there's no sun. Guess what? No sun, no life on solar system. Seemed like it was a waste of energy and time. And how did the people there at Maz Kanata's palace, how did they see the laser beam in the sky going across the galaxy, we're assuming, to blow up the Senate planet? I had a lot of questions, and most of them were science-based. And on the second viewing, I was like, you know what? There's also no sound in space. I need to just kind of get over it.
And there's also light swords that are technically impossible at this point.
Right, exactly. Yeah, Star Wars is not a science fiction movie. It's more of a fantasy movie.
Going out of Force Awakens, I probably felt similar to you in the fact that I was probably more pumped coming out of Phantom Menace. My problems with the movie, and I do like the movie. I don't want anybody to think I don't enjoy the movie. I do enjoy the movie. But my problems with it, and I'm wondering if you could give your thoughts about this or whether you agree or disagree with it. While it is a good movie, it is pretty much a remake of New Hope with Empire Strikes Back bits thrown in there. The prequels were their own, for the most part, their own thing. And so far, this new trilogy isn't. I'm not saying there isn't original ideas in there, but they borrowed a lot from the original trilogy.
There was a lot of what they probably consider to be paying homage to the original. And to be honest, when I first saw it, I didn't really think about it that much. The part that bugged me was the X-Wing flying through the trench. I was like, really? You have to put that in there? Like, really? Why? You know, I've read articles talking about all the other stuff. The hero comes from a desert planet and all that, and you know, she rejects the call to become a Jedi, just like Luke said he couldn't become a Jedi. And I don't know. I think that again, that is something that the media grabbed onto for a hot minute, and everybody kind of just ran with it. I don't think it's as offensive as a lot of people make it out to be. I don't know. It's the hero's journey. It's following the hero's journey.
I wasn't offended by it. I just wish they had done different things.
What are all the points that you saw that seemed like they were basically ripping off the original movie?
There's the thing you already mentioned. Rey lives on a desert planet, kind of like Tatooine. There's the Starkiller Base, which is basically a huge sphere planet killer, which is basically a bigger Death Star. There's the Dark Jedi who wears a mask. He does eventually take it off, but he does wear... Well, and to be fair, none of the other Sith before in the prequels wore masks of any kind. There's the fact that we have a character from the previous 3 films who's the main character, who's now much older. He becomes a mentor to Rey. Then he gets killed off at the end of it. People yell no. Somebody shoots at the guy who killed him.
Let's hit on a couple of those points.
Okay.
So, so the first one was Desert Planet, right? That annoys me a little bit. That's just there to make it feel like original Star Wars. Why they couldn't just make it Tatooine, I don't know. What was your next point?
Starkiller Base.
Okay, so real world military. You look at World War I tanks. Sure, it's not a Death Star, but you look at World War I tanks. And then you compare them to modern day tanks. They accomplish the exact same thing. They're basically the exact same design. They got treads. They got a giant gun. They're just bigger.
Okay, touche. Go on.
Kylo Ren wearing a mask, whereas previous Sith Lords did not. What's Kylo Ren's sole purpose? He's trying to be like Darth Vader. He idolizes Darth Vader. What if you're idolizing somebody and you're trying to complete what he started and you're trying to do what he wants to do? what are you going to do? You're going to emulate him. You're going to try to be like your hero, even though the hero's not a very good guy. You're going to try to be like the hero, and you're going to put on a mask just like he had a scary mask.
Also, good point. The whole Han Solo
Oh,
relationship
yeah,
with Rey.
getting offed, yeah. So that is not so much a ripoff of A New Hope. That's a ripoff of Campbell and the hero's journey. The mentor has to die. If the mentor doesn't die, there's no reason for the main character to rise up and become the hero that they're meant to be, because you would always have that mentor who it's the, you know, the same thing as the child leaving the house, right? To become its own man. Otherwise, you've got the parents always there to help them along. They need to learn to, you know, stand on their own 2 feet and become the hero of the story. If the mentor's there, they can't do that. That's part of Campbell's, you know, hero's journey.
I was going to say, but they didn't do that in the prequels, but they kind of did with...
No, they totally did. Qui-Gon died.
Yeah.
He was the mentor.
Yeah, he was really the main Jedi. But anyway, so yes, you brought up some very good points.
It's what I'm here for. Both sides of the same coin, right?
I read probably last year after Force Awakens came out that something I didn't know, because I had done a story on Star Wars regarding Force Awakens. For that, I knew a lot of people kept mentioning that with Force Awakens came out, they were hoping to not only see the 9 movies that were originally, quote-unquote, originally planned, but the 12 movies that were originally planned. And I found that very head-scratching, because since I was a kid, I had heard about 9 movies being made. I had never heard about 12 movies being made. Doing a little bit of research, and I don't know exactly how true this is. I know George Lucas said at one point that he would like to do 9 movies, and then I think he said 3 basically spin-off movies talking about different characters.
There was a small window of time, it was probably right after Star Wars became a phenomenon, where George Lucas did say, I think he's quoted maybe as saying it once, 12 movies. Of course, he's also said 3 movies, and he said 6 movies, and he said 9 movies. So take that with a grain of salt. But I believe that he did say that at one point of time, but that's not the common number that people refer to. At that point, he didn't say spin-off movies. However, the idea to do spin-off movies was George's idea before they decided to sell the company. So the idea to make more Star Wars happened before they sold the company to Disney. They had actually, when he convinced Kathleen Kennedy to come over from Kennedy Marshall to be the head of Lucasfilm, he told her at that point that they were going to be planning to do 7, 8, 9, and to try doing spin-offs as well. That was his idea, to do movies that were adjacent to the main saga of the Skywalkers.
Before getting to Rogue One specifically, what is your kind of opinion about Star Wars spin-off movies?
I think it's fine, depending on the subject matter. So, like Rogue One, I thought it was great. Give me movies about people that I know nothing about, because then there's no preconceived notions. You know, you don't have the fallout like you had with the prequels, where people already had it, you know, made up in their mind how certain characters were going to be back in the day. There were also rumors, along with Boba Fett, of having like a origin story for Yoda, and that kind of stuff I definitely do not want. I don't want an origin story for Yoda. I'm not really excited about the young Han Solo movie. I like his introduction in A New Hope. I don't feel like we need to see how he got there. But yeah, overall the concept is fine. I would prefer that they stick to completely adjacent stuff where we just don't know what happened and we don't know the people involved.
Yeah, I mean, Yoda in particular is kind of a problem. I had forgotten about him because I know George Lucas, and I think, as far as I know, most people have kind of respected this, that he was always very adamant that, I mean, we don't know the name of his species, we don't know his planets, name of his planet, where it is. We've seen other members of his species, but we never...
Yeah, Yaddle.
But we never get to learn really much about his species or where he comes from personally. Right. And I don't know how you would even do that anyway, because he's 900 years old when he dies, so it's kind of, how do you show that in a movie? That's a lot to do in one film.
There are some things that, like, I prefer to have mystery. Like, I prefer, which is another reason why I didn't really like him whipping out a lightsaber and whooping butt, is because I don't need him to be fully fleshed out like that. I prefer him to be an enigma.
Rogue One, obviously just came, as we record this, just came out less than a week ago.
It did?
Oh, you didn't know about that? Yeah, there's a new Star Wars movie that came out.
Jeez, I had no idea.
And I know you've seen it how many times by now?
Twice.
Twice. Okay, I thought you'd seen it 3 times, but okay. You saw
No,
it twice.
just twice. Yep.
And what is kind of your thoughts? Obviously, you've had less time to think about it than like Force Awakens or.
Right. Yeah. Overall, I enjoyed it. I left the theater liking it a lot more than I liked The Force Awakens when I first left the theater of that movie. However, I mean, it's a different Star Wars movie, right? It's not your typical romp. It's not fun. It's not a fantasy. It's not lighthearted. It's very heavy. It's very dark. There was a probably 6 or 7 year old child sitting in the row behind me when I saw it, and this was the second time I'd seen it, so I already knew what was going to happen in the movie and what it was about. And part of me wanted to turn around and give the parents a gentle warning that they might be having some deep conversations on their way home.
One thing I kind of like about it is that, and I don't think this is a big spoiler, so I'll mention it. Darth Vader is in the movie.
Yes, he is.
He's not in the movie very much. The thing I like about that is it's very. I've heard a lot of people complain about some of the movies and some of the spin-off stuff that they are sometimes too Jedi focused, and they would like to see stuff that doesn't. I mean, there are more things going on than just the Jedi. And the nice thing about this, especially for people who've been wanting that, is that it's very Jedi light. There's hardly any of that in the movie.
I really liked it. That aspect of it, sure, give me a great lightsaber fight and I'm all in, but I did enjoy seeing the military side of it. And especially it was interesting the shades of gray that was put in there. Up until this movie, everything was very black and white, especially with the original trilogy. Empire was bad. The Rebellion was good. In the prequels, you had the Jedi and the Republic were good, and the Separatists were bad. There was no real in-between except for Emperor Palpatine, who was playing both sides. But now with Rogue One, right off the bat, you learn something about one of the main characters and what he's capable of that you would not see in any other Star Wars movie.
And it's shocking, too, because you don't think...
Yeah.
This is very early in the movie, but... I wouldn't say what it is, but it is not something you would think to see from, not even like beginning of the movie New Hope, Han Solo. I wouldn't expect this. You just don't expect it to happen. And I didn't know if I should even like the character after this.
Exactly. And it's one of those things like, is he redeemable? I started thinking about it, I'm like, well, they're trying for a more quote unquote realistic take on the galactic civil war. And even in the real world, a lot of rebellions are built on some pretty sketchy stuff. You got to do some stuff that you might not want to tell your mom about. And it was kind of refreshing to see that. But on the same side, that didn't feel like Star Wars. Does that make any sense?
No, it does. It does. And there is a difference. Okay, well, first off, before we get more into this, if you don't know what the plot of Rogue One is, basically it's how the rebellion got the plans to the Death Star.
Yeah. It's the opening crawl of A New Hope.
Yes. So that's basically what it is. But being a spin-off movie, there are things that are different about it in terms of how it's shot, in terms of certain things that you expect to be in a Star Wars movie that are not in this movie. They start with a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but there isn't a title scroll. There isn't a Wilhelm scream in the movie, as far as I've noticed.
Yeah, I was listening for it the second time, and I thought I heard it, but yeah, it wasn't that.
Like we said already, there's very little Jedi stuff in the movie. It is shot a bit differently. It looks, like you said...
Very differently.
Like you said, there is a bit more of a reality to it. It feels a little bit less fantasy and a bit more realistic, I guess.
Yep.
There's an opening scene in a field in front of somebody's house. That felt very realistic. It didn't feel Star Wars.
I loved how that was shot. It was so beautiful.
No, I agree. But anyway, there's a lot of things very different from that, so people should know that going into it. It is different, but I like that it's different. In the same way I didn't like that Force Awakens was too same, I like that this was different from what's had come before it.
I feel like they really went for the dark, gritty war movie that they had promised. The director had said that when they were just starting to kind of come up with a visual canvas for the movie, that what they did was they took old World War II pictures and basically put Star Wars elements on it. Like they replaced the machine guns with blasters, and they replaced the World War II helmets with rebellion helmets and stormtroopers, and and that was the feel that they wanted to go for. And I feel like they really nailed that part until they got into the Imperial facility to actually steal the plans, and then I feel like that stuff was very Star Wars. The crawl is interesting. On the one hand, I understand why they did it. They're trying to make sure that the audience knows. We're talking general audience, not Star Wars nuts like me. General audience knows right off the bat that this is not Episode 8. Because you're going to have that problem with movies that are released outside of chronological order. You look at like the Marvel movies, other than Captain America: The First Avenger, they all happen chronologically. And so when a movie comes out one year and is Episode 7, and then another movie in the same franchise comes out a year later, a lot of the general audience is just going to assume, oh, it's the next Star Wars movie. It must be Episode 8. Whereas with this, it immediately indicates visually that it's not Episode 8. So I understand why they did it. However, I feel like there was stuff that could have been said in that opening crawl that would have clarified some stuff. Specifically, the relationship between Krennic and Galen Erso. The history of those two characters. I know that there's more there because I read the prequel novel, Star Wars Catalyst, but I feel like that kind of information would have been good in a crawl to make that feel a little bit more impactful and would kind of give you a better sense of who Galen Erso is and why the Empire wants him, and really would define the fact that he doesn't want to go willingly.
And just to clarify for people who haven't seen the movie, two characters he's talking about is, I forget the actor's name, but he did Hannibal.
Mads Mikkelsen.
Yeah, yes, and he was the villain in Casino Royale. He's basically being asked, not so nicely by the Empire, to develop a weapon for them. You can guess what it is, but there's a main, I forget what rank he is, but he's a general or admiral or whatever the hell he is for the Empire, and they have some sort of past that they don't really go into. My thing about the crawl is, because I was trying to think of, because I was just talking about my wife about this, because she wanted a crawl in there, and I knew going into it there wasn't a crawl, so maybe I was just more prepared for it, and I was trying to think of what really would have benefited from that, because if you've seen the other movies, you know why things are the way they are during these events that take place right before New Hope.
For those who don't know, this takes place a week and a half before, like the opening doesn't, because it's kind of like a flashback, but the main crux of the movie is like a week
I don't know
before, and then the end of it is like right up to the beginning of A New Hope. Yeah, if you know the world of A New Hope, you pretty much know the world of this movie.
But I didn't really know what they could have benefited from the crawl. And in terms of the relationship between those two characters, I felt that I knew enough about them. I didn't feel like I needed to know more about why they treat each other the way they do. I like the idea of not telling the audience everything, that you just kind of have to guess at some of their history. You're doing some of the work yourself. I like movies that do that. And kind of like the thing with Yoda, instead of just giving you everything about him that you don't necessarily need, I don't feel like I need to know that about themselves. I think that was all pretty much hinted at. Even if it was lightly, I felt like I knew enough about them. I didn't need to know more about them.
The absence of the opening crawl also means the absence of the giant Star Wars logo to the Star Wars fanfare by John Williams. Instead, it just cuts right to the beginning of the film with this giant blank music cue by Michael Giacchino. What'd you think of that?
I was fine with it. I was almost thinking, because I was trying to think of when I learned that there was no crawl in the movie, I was almost wondering if they were going to do something that was almost reminiscent of the crawl in terms, or kind of reference it in a way, like have the long time ago thing, and then have like a piece of music or a sound effect. I was thinking it's like a battle scene of some sort, if it would start with some action, that sounded like the beginning notes of the crawl with the Star Wars logo. That would have been very interesting and kind of a cool way to do it. They don't do that, but I'm fine with how they did it. My thing is I think one reason why I'm not as bothered by the absence of the crawl, I'm glad that they're setting themselves apart from the other movies in that way. I'm fine with the episode movies being the only ones with the crawl, being the only ones with the episode whatever. I'm fine with those being the only ones that have that, because it makes them a bit more, I think, special than having all the movies be like that.
Hmm.
I don't know. To me, it doesn't bother me as much, and I was almost kind of hoping they wouldn't do it before I even learned whether it was going to be in the movie or not. I was fine with them not doing that.
Makes sense. What'd you think of the score, the music in it? Did you pay any attention to that? Listening, or were you like me and listening for specific music cues? Because it's not John Williams, right? It's yeah, the first Star Wars movie to not be scored by John Williams, which is strange. You're used to his flavor of music, and a lot of this score was very reminiscent of a lot of the motifs and themes from the original trilogy, but there wasn't like the big bombastic songs as much as there is, and part of me really likes that because you go back and you look at A New Hope, and there really aren't those big, other than the key ones, the opening crawl music, right, the theme music. You've got the twin suns when Luke Skywalker goes out and stares at the twin suns on Tatooine, and you've got Millennium Falcon escaping from the Death Star. Those are the three big, like, sweeping, exciting, loud, bombastic music. There's no Imperial March in A New Hope. I'll be honest, I was a little disappointed when bum 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 when that happened. I was a little disappointed. But he did put in the motif of Darth Vader, though, that Williams had in A New Hope. So I like that, and I love that he put the Death Star theme in there. The first time you saw the Death Star, the bomb bum bum bum. I loved that. But other than that, the music was really kind of forgettable and small and simple.
Yeah, I was going to say that it isn't terribly memorable. The only part that I think stood out to me was I forget whose theme it was. It was played near the end of the movie with a scene with Felicity Jones's character and the other actor whose name I'm forgetting.
Diego Luna.
Yes, near the end of the movie, there's a scene between them that's a big emotional scene. That theme stood out to me, and I like that. But there really wasn't much in there that I kind of took notice of. But I will say to the guy who's the guy who did the score for this?
Michael Giacchino.
He's doing his own thing, and he's doing different
Hmm.
scores, but he's at the same time he's not doing something so radically different
Right.
that it feels reminiscent of John Williams in a way, which I think is good because, again, I think it should still feel like Star Wars to an extent because it is still a Star Wars movie, and the music
Hmm.
really helps with that. So if they had done something radically different, it would have been very jarring to the point of I don't know how much I would have liked the movie. One of my things about the movie, I like the fact that, for me, unlike Force Awakens, it is doing its own thing. But, despite that fact, one of the things I liked about Force Awakens is I really did like the characters a lot. I like Finn, I like Poe, I like
Right.
Rey, but I didn't feel like, unlike Force Awakens, I didn't really feel like I knew the characters well enough when I left. There's some characters I like. Alan Tudyk's character as the droid is
Everybody loves K2SO.
he is wonderful. The oh god, I can't remember. I forgot his name. The Asian actor.
Donnie Yen
Oh, Donnie Yen.
is the actor, yeah, and he plays Chirrut Imwe.
His character is good, but besides them, I really didn't care much about the characters.
So you
Especially
didn't care about the main characters, the yeah,
no, I know, especially Felicity Jones and
Diego Luna.
yes. For people who don't know, I have a terrible memory, so forgive me for forgetting names.
There's a lot of names in this movie. Like there's a lot of
Yeah.
characters, and I think that's because I kind of had the same thing where I never really I got attached to Chirrut and I got attached to K2SO. The other ones, not so much. And I think a lot of that's because it's an ensemble. It's definitely an ensemble movie, so you're automatically going to have less time with all of the characters to actually get to know them. But I feel like you start the movie with Jin as a little girl. I feel like you should have some sort of attachment to her because everything is kind of through her point of view. So you should at least feel an attachment to her.
Exactly. I mean, did you feel?
She's no Rey.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not to. I don't want to make it out like I'm trying to attack Felicity Jones as an actress. She's a fine actress,
Well,
but
and they're totally different characters, right? Like Jin is meant to be the quirky, likable, naive girl that everybody instantly loves because she's adorable and quirky and nice. Whereas Jin is not that type of character. She's seen a lot of stuff. She's been through a lot of stuff, and so You're not supposed to adore her in the way that you're supposed to adore Rey.
And I almost feel like, because there's a line in the trailer, which actually isn't in the movie, oddly enough.
Yeah, there's a lot in the trailers that aren't in the movie.
Yeah, there's a line in the movie that Felicity Jones has where she says, "This is a rebellion, I rebel," which is not in the movie, but makes out to be like she's a rebel, and she just kind of does her own thing. She doesn't really pay attention to what the rebels are doing, what the Empire is doing. She just is on her own, running around and stuff. And I feel like I get the concept of if that was what they really wanted to do with the character, I get that, and I can see that a bit in the performance and what is on screen. But I feel like they're going through the motions a bit too much. I don't really feel like there isn't enough there. It just feels too two-dimensional or one-dimensional or whatever.
Yeah, I think it would have helped if we had seen, because when you first see her as an adult, she's in an Imperial prison. I think it would have helped to see what put her there. I think that would have kind of helped solidify what type of a person she is, because throughout the whole movie, her main purpose is to get reunited with her father, and that's kind of the driving force that moves her along. And I don't know if that's really enough. And I feel like of all of the good guy characters, Donnie Yen is really the most human character, the one that I felt was fleshed out and actually had emotion to him. The two main characters, Jin and Urso, they spend the movie angsty. And I will say, I mean, I don't want it to sound like we're just like ragging on the actors and the characters, but the scene where those two have an argument and get into it on the ship after the big attack on the landing platform.
Yes.
That scene was amazing. I loved the electricity in the room during that scene.
There's a lot of Easter eggs in this movie for previous Star Wars films. Some of them subtle, which is good. I'm sure there were ones that went over my head because I certainly don't know everything about the Star Wars universe. And there are other ones that are very obvious. How do you feel about the kind of really overt kind of references and kind of callbacks and characters and stuff?
The overt cameos, they were kind of a mixed bag for me. Some of them felt really forced. The one where they literally run into a couple of characters that we saw in A New Hope, I felt that was 100% fan service and didn't need to be in the movie whatsoever. It didn't help the story. It didn't fit or anything. That one to me, like, sure, I chuckled and then I immediately rolled my eyes and hoped that I didn't see anything else like that in the rest of the film. There were a couple of other ones that really kind of took me aback during the final firefight, or the space battle, where they actually took alternate takes from certain X-Wing pilots from A New Hope and put them into this movie. And that, to me, felt right. I liked that because it would make sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense that they're there. The guy, I mean, we'll just go ahead and say it's Red Leader and Gold Leader from A New Hope. And the gentleman that played Red Leader is sadly no longer with us. So they just took, snippets of the movie and found a voice actor to add a couple extra lines to match it. But the guy who played Gold Leader is still alive, and they actually got him in the recording studio to record new lines for him to say, for just chatter in the background. And I think that kind of stuff is great because it makes sense for them to be there. And I also liked how that one of the squadrons just doesn't make it, and that squadron's not in A New Hope at all. Stuff like that just really makes sense. The elephant in the room is the reanimation of Peter Cushing as Tarkin. I had heard rumors that he was going to have a brief cameo in the movie as a CGI character. Now, when I first saw, because we first see him and he's, looking out a window, and it's the shot right over his shoulder. So you see the back of his head and you see a slight reflection of him in the window. And I thought, oh, cool. That's all we're going to see. And then he turned around. Yeah. I went, oh my gosh, they went full on Tarkin. Wow. And moral questions aside, I give them credit for being brave enough to do it. I really liked having Tarkin in the story. The CGI's not quite there yet. His face looked fine until he talked, and then the talking was not quite right. I'm sure it'll look fine when you rent it on Blu-ray and watch it on your small screen at home, but on the IMAX screen, it was very, very evident that that wasn't a real person. What'd you think of him?
I saw that opening scene with him, and I kind of felt, I think, similar to what you said, where you see his reflection in the window or whatever, and you kind of see his face, but kind of not. And I thought, oh, that's really good. I mean, you know it's him, too. I mean, you know, if you've seen the first movie.
Yeah, it's very obvious.
You know it's him. But I thought that was really good because, yes, just seeing other movies, I know that whole CGI. I mean, I'm sure they had an actor on set and then they replaced his face digitally. Yep. And it is better than I've seen in some other movies like Tron 2, which let's not even go there.
Yeah, that's just, wrong.
Yeah, which, I mean, and part of the problem with that is, to go off on Tron 2 just for 1 second, right now they're better at making older actors look younger. Kind of a la, I think, Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen in the third X-Men movie, or Michael Douglas at the beginning of Ant-Man, which is really good. They're better at doing that than total face CGI replacement, which just looks off still. I mean, it looks pretty good, but especially when he when he talks, around his lips, they just look weird. I don't know what's going on there, but it just looks...
It doesn't look right.
But anyway, seeing his reflection in the window, I thought, okay, this is good. We can tell who it is. The fact that we're only seeing his reflection in the back of his head kind of masks the fact that the CGI isn't quite there yet. And then he turns around, and it's like, okay, I guess we're not doing that. We're just going to show his face with all the imperfections there. I forget if we mentioned this, but he doesn't just have really a cameo in the movie. He is.
He's in several scenes and has interactions with other actors on set.
But if he had just been in that scene, I would have really preferred if they had not shown his face, because that would have been, because they kind of did something like that at the end of Revenge of the Sith, where there's an actor who had makeup put on him to make him look more like Peter Cushing,
and didn't look anything like Peter Cushing. He looked horrible.
I would say from the first time I saw it, I thought he did, and then repeated viewings, not so much. I will say it's good. There was, I think, a scene they were going to show him more prominently, and they decided not to do that. I think it's really good because the makeup really doesn't hold up to. They did well enough for the profile or whatever shot that they did. If they just in that one scene with him in Rogue One, I would prefer it if we had just shown him in the window, and that was it. Watching more of the movie and seeing that he was more of a prominent character than just kind of an Easter egg character, it probably would have been very hard to, and a bit awkward, to never show his face.
And really, by the end of the movie, I was used to it.
Yeah.
I think it was that initial shock of, oh my God, it's Peter Cushing, and then immediately studying it to see where the flaws are, because that's what I do when I see something that is impossible. I try to figure out, but by the end of it, I was used to it. It's still not 100% there. I think the problem is that it is so good, but not perfect, that our brains feel that it's weird.
I think other people have said this, that things that we recognize and that we see a lot, like human faces, are harder to do just because we see them so much. It's much easier to do, especially things that are inanimate, like a table or a piece of clothing.
A Jar Jar.
Yeah, to an extent, aliens are bits. The aliens in Avatar, those are easier because they look different than us. Humans' faces are still really hard to do.
You look to it like Jurassic Park, even Jurassic World, right, which has better CGI dinosaurs than Jurassic Park did, obviously, because technology has gotten that much better. But looking at that movie, like, wow, that looks like a real dinosaur. Problem is, you've never actually seen a real dinosaur. If you actually were to see real dinosaurs every day, and then you went and you looked at Jurassic World, and you go, yeah, they didn't quite get that snarl quite right. That just doesn't seem real. Yeah. It's all perspective and what you're used to.
Do we just want to mention the two not quite living people that are in the movie that are in every other Star Wars movie?
So the other cameo was, of course, R2-D2 and C-3PO. And they're in it for, 5 seconds? Enough for Anthony Daniels to say one line.
Yeah.
So that you can still say that, he's been in every single Star Wars movie, the only person to be in every single Star Wars movie. It's fine. It doesn't, again, it's like the other one with the guys from A New Hope, where it doesn't move the story along. There's no point for them to be there and say that. It makes sense in the story that they are there, but we don't need to see that they're there.
I mean, it does keep up the tradition of having those two characters be in. I mean, because obviously Kenny Baker passed away, so he's not technically in the movie, but those two characters have been in every movie. So it keeps up that tradition, which I think at some point they're just going to have to break, because they could do it for the Han Solo movie, but it just...
I hope not. Unless there's a story reason for it, it shouldn't be in the story. Yeah, I hope that they don't.
It's one of those things where it's fine if they do it in all the episode movies. But yeah, it's forcing things a bit. And actually, one thing I'm curious about is, okay, Peter Cushing, they bring him back thanks to a new voice actor and CGI and a body double. But one character that is totally recast, and I'm just going to give this away because it's in the trailer, so it doesn't matter, but is Mon Mothma. She's played by a totally different actress. There's no attempts at CGI or anything about that. And before I ask you how you feel about that, I do want to point out to people who don't know, and this is actually kind of funny, that the actress who plays Mon Mothma in Rogue One was going to play her in, I think, Revenge of the Sith, but they cut her part out of the movie. Do you feel that strange at all that they recast this one part but then CGI'd this other one?
I think the reason that you cast her to do it is, first of all, yes, she previously played the role in several scenes in Revenge of the Sith that ended up on the cutting room floor. And you cast her because she looks a lot like Mon Mothma. Like, I think that she pulls it off really well. The flip side of that is that because you recast her, and you also recast the guy who plays General Dodonna, the white-haired guy with the pointy white beard. He's in A New Hope, and he's the general who's like telling them about the mission to blow up the Death Star. But yeah, the only reason that we're really talking about the fact that they recast them is because they didn't recast Peter Cushing. And I'm guessing that the reason that they felt they couldn't do that is because it does take place hours, maybe a day before we see him next. Whereas with Mon Mothma, it's 6 years before we see her again.
And this isn't to knock the actress who originally played Mon Mothma, who I don't know what else other things she did, but Tarkin is played by Peter Cushing. He's one of the he's one of the most.
Yeah, enough said. Yeah, I did. We're talking about nods. I did enjoy some of the stuff that they put in the movie that is nods to things that aren't even in the movies. They're nods to things from like the first draft of the original Star Wars movie, like the Guardians of the Wills. The Wills are something that's from that original draft and is in the original novelization to Star Wars, but it's not in the movie anywhere. The Wills. I love that they're talking about kyber crystals, which is actually something that originated in that Splinter of the Mind's Eye book that came out in the 70s.
For those who don't know, and this isn't really a spoiler, but they're basically the crystals that are put in used for lightsabers. And it was something I was really glad to see, because there's no mention of them in any of the other movies.
Those kind of things are really there for the nerds like us that just love all that. Even like the Wills thing, like that's and Chirrut Imwe, when he's panhandling there in the city and he's saying, "May the force of others be with you," and that's what everybody said in the original draft of Star Wars. They didn't just say, "May the force be with you." They said, "May the force of others be with you." So like that kind of stuff just made me smile and made me happy, because I got it, and I'm sure that, well, going to the 10 o'clock showing on opening night, I'm sure most of the audience I was with got it, but most of the general audience probably wouldn't.
It's fan indulging without being like, "Hey, here's C-3PO."
Yeah, and there were some nods to the prequels, which I was happy about, because a lot of people have been talking about how since Disney took over, there's been a distancing of Star Wars from the prequels. And so I was really happy to see that, all the talk about the Jedi and everything, which I guess is kind of an homage to the prequels because they're talking about that era. But then the big tank that Jyn is in when she gets rescued at the beginning of the film, that's a transport from Revenge of the Sith. So the whole idea with the vehicles in the original trilogy was that they were old. Everything was old and beat up, and everything with the prequels was new and shiny. And so it was cool to see something from the prequels that used to be new and shiny all beat up and being repurposed for things that it wasn't initially used for. When you first see Vader, the location that he's at made me really happy because that's from Revenge of the Sith. Everything with that scene just made me happy because there was a lot of prequel stuff just in the feel of that scene that really took me back to Revenge of the Sith, which was cool.
Yeah, and the first time you see Vader, I didn't expect them to introduce him that way. It's a very... I would not say what they did with it, but it's a very interesting way to do that. They're showing him in a way that you've never really seen him before, and I didn't even know was possible, really.
Yeah,
given his,
it was great.
Given his condition, but it was a very, very nice moment. How do you feel about these spin-off movies going forward? Do you feel the same as before you saw Rogue One?
Yeah, I feel like Rogue One did a really good job of putting my nerves at ease, and I think it did the same thing for the head honchos at Lucasfilm and Disney, in that obviously it's not going to do the same numbers that The Force Awakens did. Nobody expected The Force Awakens to do as good as it did at the box office, but I feel like the box office results from Rogue One and the reviews that it has had so far have been exactly what Disney and Lucasfilm wanted to see, and it's exactly what I wanted to see, where they are going to feel more comfortable taking these types of risks and not making every movie feel like a Star Wars movie. They're going to be able to go just outside of the box enough to do something really different and make it feel different and fresh, and that makes me feel better about the Han Solo movie and the other spinoffs that we get.
For me personally, in terms of the episode ones, I really hope they stop after 9 and don't extend it after that. But I mean, in terms of spin-off movies, I'm really not as sure. Is there a limit you would like to see to those, or are you fine them keep doing those as long as the quality is maintained?
Well, and here's the thing. So you mentioned not going on with the numbered movies after 9. Disney likes to make money. They bought Star Wars to make money. So far with the franchise, they have made a lot of money. They're not going to stop. They're not going to stop until it stops making money. What shape those movies will be in, nobody knows. Kathleen Kennedy had said that after Rogue One comes out, they're going to kind of get together and hash out what's going to happen beyond Episode 9. So right now, we know we've got Rogue One, the Han Solo movie, 8 and 9, and probably one more spinoff that's already been in development that would come out after 9. There's also talk of them continuing, kind of like the Marvel movies, where it is a continuing story, but not having it be, episode 10, episode 11, episode 12. If you don't have the episodic saga films, going forward, there won't be any spin-off films other than the Han Solo one, because they're going to happen chronologically, and there's really no spin-offs. It's all just going to be one giant story. So who knows? I don't like looking that far ahead in the future, because it's just going to set me up for disappointment. They're never going to do exactly what I want them to do. But I would prefer them to continue on with episodic ones. I know it's not ideal, especially with Roman numerals. Once you get up to episode 50, it's going to be a little weird. But I'd like to see at least have a core set of films going forward that follows one main cast of characters, and then maybe have one of these like Rogue One where it's an adjacent story that doesn't have anything to do with those characters. I'd like to see that happen, but I don't know if it's going to after episode 9 comes out.
So I know you have some things you would like to recommend to our kind viewers, Andrew. What would those be?
There are some cartoons, some animated shows that have come out. And no, I'm not talking about the droids and Ewok hour that came out in the early 80s, because that is hard to watch. I went back and watched those a few years ago, and it's not easy to sit through those.
What, the animated droid show?
Yeah.
I watched that as a kid. I thought that was fine.
Well, I watched it as a kid and loved it when I was 5, but watching it as a grown man, no, they're pretty terrible. Pretty terrible. But anyway, there's some more recent stuff. The first one that came out was the Clone Wars, and that was something that started off with George Lucas, and he decided that he wanted to expand on the years between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And so there's a bunch of episodes. There was 5 seasons that aired, and then a 6th season that came out exclusive to Netflix. So you can now watch all of them on Netflix if you want to. But there's a couple of arcs that I recommended that you see, because I think they're really interesting and purposeful as the whole universe of Star Wars continues to expand. So the first one that I'd recommended was a series of 4 episodes that actually features a character from Rogue One, Saw Gerrera. So he's the character played by Forrest Whitaker, and this is a series of episodes that happens when he's much younger, obviously, and it's the kind of the beginning of what would eventually turn into the Rebel Alliance. So the idea was that some of the separatist groups from the Clone Wars would continue to be disgruntled towards the government, because basically the Republic turned into the Empire, and they would continue on in these separate factions, these little rebel cells, and then it wouldn't be until we start to see them in the original trilogy that they start to band together and become the Rebel Alliance, because they're rebels who are aligning with each other. Convenient. So yeah, I watched these episodes before I saw Rogue One, thinking that Saw Gerrera was going to be in Rogue One. However, these episodes really didn't do anything to enhance his character in Rogue One at all. The only thing that it helps is that you further understand why Saw is kind of the way he is in Rogue One, because you realize that he's been fighting this war before this war even started. He's been fighting it since he was a young lad. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But after seeing Rogue One, I'm not sure that it's a must-watch.
Yeah, I mean, his character is not... It's not terribly expanded upon. I mean, you know a little bit more about his past, but does it really tell you anything you probably didn't guess in Rogue One?
The Clone Wars series as a whole kind of got dogged on by a lot of fans early on because the animation wasn't great and the stories were kind of fragmented in the first season and a half or so. But then once it got into the later half of the second season and definitely in the third season, it really started to get good and started to really add stuff to the Star Wars mythos. And that includes the other series of episodes that I recommended for you, which is all about Nightsisters and Darth Maul. What? I thought he died in Phantom Menace. What? What did you think of these?
Oh, before I forget, the storyline, I mean, you described it as the Onderon arc, the last one we talked about, and that's episodes...
Season 3, episodes 12 through 14.
And this one, the one we're talking about now, the Nightsisters / Darth Maul one, that takes place over multiple seasons, which I can probably post somewhere with this episode. Just to verify, I had not watched any of the show except for there was basically a 2-hour or hour and a half pilot that they aired in theaters in 2006 or 7 or something like that. And I had seen that, but besides that, I had seen really nothing of the show except for some advertisements on Cartoon Network or whatever channel it was on. Watch the episodes that we're recommending, especially if you've seen the prequels and are familiar with the Star Wars universe. You should have no trouble watching these. I think for the most part, they're really not. They're very well contained with each other. They explain things very well. But anyway, the Nightsisters thing, I actually liked a lot. It has to do with Count Dooku has an assassin. She's basically a Dark Jedi. Basically leaves for dead, which makes her kind of annoyed, to say the least. And the beginning of the story is basically her trying to get revenge on Count Dooku, which leads to many power struggles and eventual stuff with Darth Maul. I would say one thing I particularly found interesting about this storyline was that, because there's really in my opinion, three hero characters. There's Obi-Wan, there's Anakin, and there's Anakin's Padawan.
Ahsoka.
Those, to me, are the 3 kind of hero characters, and they are barely in the storyline. Anakin and Ahsoka, especially Ahsoka, are hardly in this. at all. I think Ahsoka is in 1 or 2 scenes or something throughout 11 episodes, and then Obi-Wan is in it a bit. He's in it the most. But there's some episodes where they don't appear at all. It's just these side characters that we're seeing. And I really kind of like that. They didn't feel the need to shoehorn in Obi-Wan and Anakin and all that. Mm-hmm. They were brave enough that, we can do these episodes about characters, totally different characters, who aren't even good guys. They're just all these bad guys who are basically trying to kill each other. And they went, again, they would sometimes go entire 2, I don't think 3 episodes, but they would go sometimes a couple episodes without seeing a hair of any of the good guy characters. And I really liked that they were brave enough to do that.
The initial concept of Clone Wars was that you wouldn't see Anakin or Obi-Wan at all, but then as they were in development, they decided that, well, in order to get people to tune in, we probably need to have, the main characters in there some. The first couple seasons, it's very centered on Anakin and his Padawan Ahsoka. As the seasons go on and more characters are introduced, it starts to focus some more on particularly the clones. And if you were to ask my wife who her favorite Star Wars character is, it would be Captain Rex, one of the clones from the Clone Wars. So it does a really good job of showing you the war as a whole, as opposed to just following the Jedi around, which, like I said, is really nice and kind of refreshing, much in the way that Rogue One was refreshing for that exact same reason. Were you surprised at all with what they did with Darth Maul?
Just to give it away, I don't think explain at all how Darth Maul survived being not only cut in half, but falling down a bottomless pit.
The Force, man. It's all the Force. Yeah, the dark side kept him alive. His rage kept him alive.
Yeah, because... But so I mean...
And after you get cut off at the torso, how do you go to the bathroom?
That's actually... I don't know. That's a question they should answer in a spinoff. Everybody pooped except for Darth Maul. Anyway, so they don't explain how he survived that at all. They just show that he's alive, and not to give too much away, but he's kind of nuts when we first meet him. And he gets better and starts this whole big plan, the conclusion of which is not the way you would expect maybe that to end. I liked him. He is expanded, because I mean, you see so little of him in Phantom Menace, and what you do see of him is mostly him standing there looking grouchy, and then him fighting. So there's not much character in Phantom Menace, so it's nice to see a bit more. You see that he's actually smart and that he's strategic, and there's more to him than just he's good.
A blunt instrument, yeah.
Yeah, he's better. He has brains too. You can maybe see more why the Emperor would have him as an apprentice.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I picked these episodes, because there's a lot of really good stuff in the Clone Wars, one of the reasons that I picked this is because of Dooku's assassin, Asajj Ventress, and she is easily one of my favorite characters from the Clone Wars because of where her character goes in the later episodes. In the beginning of the show, she's definitely a mustache twirling villain, just I'm gonna get you next time, Gadget, that kind of thing. But she really develops well starting with these episodes and becomes really interesting towards the end of the series. I would recommend everybody who enjoys Star Wars, especially the prequels, and even those people who, when they thought the prequels were just going to be the Clone Wars, I would recommend they go and check out the Clone Wars. I would not recommend they watch them in the order that they aired, because in typical Star Wars fashion, they did not air in chronological order. So it can be a little confusing at times if you're watching them by air date. StarWars.com does have a list of chronological order for episodes if you want to go out and find that. But I would recommend checking out the Clone Wars as a whole. It ends up being really good. Like I said, the first season and a half is really hit and miss, but man, once it gets to that third season, there's still some strange episodes out there, but they did a pretty good job overall, and it really like I say, it expands the universe even further and opens up some interesting concepts about the Force and what it means to be a Jedi, and kind of gets into why Obi-Wan can become a Force ghost and disappears when he dies, but Qui-Gon doesn't. So it kind of fills in some gaps for those of us who have been scratching our heads since the prequels about some of the inconsistencies between the prequels and the original trilogy. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it.
You had one other show that you briefly wanted to bring up.
There's also a show that's currently running on Disney XD called Star Wars Rebels. and that takes place a couple years before A New Hope, and it's pretty good. Actually, there's some cameos in Rogue One from Star Wars Rebels. The ship that they fly in's in it. The droid that they have is in Rogue One, and there's a mention on an intercom of one of the characters that's in the Star Wars Rebels show. So it's good, it's enjoyable, and it's been revealed that the second half of the current season will also feature Saw Gerrera. Be interesting to see what they do with that now that Rogue One has come out, and this one takes place a lot closer to Rogue One than those episodes from the Clone Wars. So it'll be good to see a lead up to why he is the way he is in Rogue One.
Do we know if Forrest Whitaker is going to voice him?
He is going to voice him in Rebels, yep. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do with that character and what Forrest Whitaker brings to the table.
Okay, well, thank you, Andrew, for being with me today on the inaugural episode of what I'm sure will be the most popular podcast.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It was my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me to come on.
For people who are curious, you can check out Andrew. He is an editor, a video editor for Star Wars Action News and Marvelous Toys. I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Marvelicious
Toys. I'm sorry. And does toy reviews, news, talks about statues, pretty much anything you could hope for. He talks about on Star Wars Action News as an occasional guest host. So check him out there and check out Star Wars Action News in general. But again, I would just like to thank Andrew again for being here. And I will see you guys next time, where the topic will be silent films, and that will be in January. So hope to see you all again then. You can find me on Twitter at CinemaPackRat. Links to my WordPress and YouTube account, where you can find film and television news and reviews, can be found in the episode's description.